Hello and welcome to a new episode of Karger in Conversation and the very first of 2025. We have an exciting year ahead, packed with engaging events, and we're thrilled to have you join us in this journey. I'm Francesca Brazzarotto, the event organizer, and I want to thank you all for tuning in today and for registering if you're watching this afterwards. For those of you who haven't attended before, this series is a quarterly event that brings together experts from the publishing industry, librarians, funders, and researchers worldwide. The main aim is to discuss the latest trends and topics in scholarly publishing from all perspectives. In our conversation today, our panelists will be diving deep into the ethics and research integrity within the scholarly community, especially as they relate to emerging technologies. Together, we'll explore how all stakeholders can collaborate to uphold the highest standards of scientific excellence and ultimately preserve the public's trust in science. So let me introduce you our varied panel of experts. Judith Szczesnik. She's the head of office of the Ombuds Committee for Research Integrity in Germany. Her studies focused on plant biology and genetics, and she worked as a postdoc in plant epigenetics. Since 2016, she advises researchers of all disciplines in matters of research integrity in close collaboration with the Ombuds Committee and their team. From 2019 to 2021, she has been co-vice chair of the European Network of Research Integrity Offices, ENRIO, and currently is a member of the editorial board of ENRIO's bulletin Research Integrity Practice in Europe. Welcome. Mr. Joel Thornton, the Associate Dean of Collections and Scholarly Communication at the J. Willard Marriott Library, University of Utah. With a robust background that spans academic libraries and corporate financial management, he brings a truly unique perspective to our discussion on research integrity. An accomplished author and speaker, Mr. Thornton's recent research delves into key issues such as research integrity, academic journal pricing transparency, open access, and library leadership. We are thrilled to have him share his insights with us today. And finally, Dr. Eleni Spirakou is a senior researcher at the School of Chemical Engineering, National Technical University of Athens. Her studies focus on ethics and political philosophy, while her research spans applied ethics, including bioethics, environmental ethics, business ethics, and research integrity, with a recent focus on ethics in research through various Horizon 2020 and Horizon Europe projects. She's also served on the organizing committee for the 8th World Conference on Research Integrity in Athens last year. And today's moderator, Dr. Gronya McNamara, Karger's own Research Integrity and Publication Ethics Manager. Thank you all for being here with us today. So before we start, just a few housekeeping notes. This event is being recorded and will later be available in English with English subtitles. And now also we have live captions for those who need them, so you can just select the captions on your screen. Please feel free to drop your questions in the chat or use the question box and use the available emojis to share your reactions as we go. At the end, I'll return to the screen to present your questions to our panel. We also have received some in advance. Any remaining questions will be addressed later on in a dedicated blog on the Karger website. Lastly, you see a feedback screen at the very end and receive an email from us today where we ask you basically for your feedback, and we'd love to hear your thoughts, suggestions for future topics, and also if you'd like to be a speaker.
So thanks, Francesca, for putting all this together. I wanted to thank everybody for coming today, and particularly the speakers from taking time from their busy days or a busy morning in Utah for Joel. We wanted, when Francesca and I started talking about this, we wanted to address the fact that sometimes it can feel like there is an information silo between researchers, research managers, librarians, and publishers. But ultimately, when it boils down to it, we're all interested in the same goal: conducting and communicating reproducible, trusted research. And so bringing the speakers here today, I'm really looking forward to discussion to talk about not just the kind of emerging trends, but also kind of the practical challenges that are happening day to day. We call this session the ethics equation, balancing progress and principles, because it felt like we're at the face of what seems to be another kind of great leap forward in terms of research capabilities with generative AI. Reflecting on that and the history of scientific progress, with every great advancement in research tools, be it culture, the first successful culture of immortalized cell lines, or CRISPR making human genome editing possible and even easy. There's always been a kind of a trail of ethical and moral potential, what you might call oversteps, as the community seeks to establish new norms and best practice as technology emerges. In thinking about that, it comes to mind the quote from a famous kind of Greek philosopher that scientists were so preoccupied with thinking about whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should. And I'm just kidding. That was, of course, a quote from Jeff Goldblum's character in Jurassic Park, a movie based on a book that very much illustrates that even with the best intentions, sometimes that's not enough in order to guarantee positive outcomes for research infrastructure. So while the stakes today might not be evading dinosaurs, there's still challenges every day for people in the research ecosystem wanting to keep up with the latest technologies in their fields, but in a responsible way. And at the front of those evolving norms and facing pressures from multiple fronts is researchers themselves and the research librarians, managers and administrators who support them. So today we're going to hear perspectives from 3 countries and 2 continents, but I know that everything we're talking about today is likely to be a global challenge. So in order to set the scene, I'm going to say our aim today is to really identify both the challenges and the threats to research integrity and responsible research practices, as well as hearing some of the practical solutions for balancing progress and embracing new technologies with principles across the research cycle. So to start us all off, I'm going to ask each of you to share what you see as the biggest challenge facing research integrity in today's scholarly communication environment. From your vantage point, be it Germany, Greece, the United States, or elsewhere, what local factors amplify or alter these challenges, and who do you think is driving the global conversation around research integrity today? So if it's okay, I'll start with you, Eleni. Where do you see the most pressing ethical dilemmas arising in your field? And how do you see local or institutional pressures shaping those challenges?
Thank you, Grain. Hello to all. Good morning or good afternoon. Thank you for the invitation and for this opportunity. So the question is quite common nowadays in our everyday practice, let's say. So as far as, let's say, ethical concern are concerned, we definitely need to address these issues within the field of emerging technologies as an umbrella term, let's say. And in a way, we realize as we work and as we evaluate protocols and projects, we realize that to some extent we are talking about old questions, really old questions, but set in a new perspective, in a new way. So there is this dilemma: is this something new that we have to deal with, or is this something old but that we need to address in a different way, and maybe to develop new tools in order to be able to understand and justify things or make decisions. So this is a general, let's say, approach, not a Greek specific kind of thing. Greece has its own particularities as a research and research institution, let's say, area, part of the world. However, we interact with the whole world, with the globe, and particularly Europe, and we have to align our practices and our approach with our colleagues and with our funders, who play a very, let's say, central role in which, let's say, ethical issues are more challenging nowadays. So part of the agenda is also the funders of research. So going back to the old questions, I'll give you an example. Questions about personal identity, personal freedom, what constitutes human agency, is needed to be seen in a different way through different types of emerging technologies. Imagine the way that we are using personal data, imagine the way that we are involved in different kinds of relationships, financial relationships, communication relationships, and then again, we develop, let's say, different parts of ourselves, but then we also need to reflect and answer the question on, are we still the same person? Do we have multiple identities when we are involved in different applications of new technologies? So these are very, let's say, general questions. But then again, these are questions that every researcher conducting research within these fields sooner or later will face. And then we also have the further step of the institutional approach and the institutional changes and policies. So it's a bottom-up and top-down process that needs to be addressed and at the same time and find, let's say, proper solutions both ways. Thank you.
I hope you don't mind me asking a follow-up question, because I was really interested in something you said quite early on there, where you said that, you know, you work in emerging technologies, but part of what you do is have to look to the past and see, is this like, have we been here before? Is there something like, was there a similar moment that we could refer to? Do you see where we are now? Do you see any parallels to where we are now with an emerging technology in the past? You hark back to another period when you're thinking of how to move forward today.
Well, a general response to that would be that imagine how people reacted in many circumstances. For instance, 2 centuries ago with the Industrial Revolution, or with even in older times, whenever something new came up, which was not familiar, and the knowledge was restricted in terms of the applications and the dangers and the benefits, people reacted. So in each given moment of the evolution of science, scientists and researchers had to respond to this kind of reactions. So I guess that even in biology, in material science, we always have these issues of the dual use, let's say, applications of developments. This is also a very old story. So we can see analogies, we can find similarities. The question now is whether we need new tools and new concepts to interpret these new, let's say, developments, or we do have what we need and we just have to change the way we are thinking. It's getting quite philosophical, I must say, but this is the right place to discuss these things. You know, when I'm in a lab with engineers and material scientists, and when I'm starting saying these kind of things, they all react. They say, "Oh, no, this is not for me. Go to the library and read Plato and Aristotle." But I think that it's something that sooner or later they will have to face and have proper answers to the public, to the society, but also to themselves and their peers.
I think I find the topic quite of repeating patterns as a society very, very interesting, and that no matter how scary things seem now, at a moment in a very general sense, we've been here before, in with a panic about new technology, be it the telephone or whole genome sequencing. But you picked up. Sorry.
Just if I may, the only I don't know, but I guess again this is also was the same in the past. It seems now that time and space are more, let's say, condensed, more shortened in a way, and that makes us feel quite anxious. But I guess that the first time that the car was built, people reacted in the same way. Again, time and space had a different, let's say, appearance all of a sudden. So maybe I agree that yes, the patterns are repetitive.
We don't, as you say, have the time to institute a person to walk in front of the car with a red flag to let people know that the car is coming, or the Gen AI is coming, like they did in the past. But you mentioned at the end some of the challenges with international collaborations and the importance of aligning best practice there. And so I wanted to turn to you, Hjordis, because from the perspective of the ombudsperson, like what issues are most prevalent that you are consulted on, and how and do they differ between Germany and with international collaborations?
Well, for us, it's interesting that our office exists and the committee that we are working for exists for 25 years, and it's partially still the same questions that we get, and that's usually about authorship, plagiarism, data, fairness, and it's kind of surprising, you would think, but on the other hand, it's not so surprising because obviously the structures haven't changed so much and the incentives and so on. And but of course we also have, the thing is, what is our office facing at the practical level, and what is happening all over Germany? Of course, I think we have the same trends like in that are happening globally, and also what Eleni just mentioned. I think everyone is really kind of overwhelmed by the speed of the development of new technologies and how to catch up with. And also in the field of research integrity, that's of course a big topic. And I feel like also, the publishers, the research integrity officers, everyone is running behind because we have these great new tools and technologies that are supposed to support us, help the researchers and help society to create new things. And then immediately as they come up, they are being abused by fraudsters, and everyone is then again just catching up with how do you detect this? How do you detect where there is, fraudulent publications? And we have problems, I think, with the awareness on these topics, and especially, so in Germany, for example, we don't have mandatory trainings on research integrity. Many universities do offer this, but usually then only to students, certain classes, certain faculties, but there's no mandatory training all over Germany. And also we have to reach the experienced researchers who are so busy with the research, and it's very difficult for them to catch up also with all the developments. And we have a system of self-regulation. So once things are found, or, you have alleged misconduct, then the institution will take action where that is concerned by this. And in the commission, again, you have researchers sitting in there in the investigative commission. So they need to be informed, but we don't have good training materials, I would say, for this. And again, when it comes to, for example, AI, how do you detect these things? How do you prove it, and so on? And commissions sooner or later, and also our office probably will have to deal with this. Internationally, well, there's so many questions in this one question, so I have to focus. what's interesting, or maybe what is different for us, is so our office can mediate in cases of conflict, but we cannot perform investigations. So in Germany, those investigations will be decentralized. And sometimes people approach us also from international collaborations because, they find us on the internet and it's a national office, and they want us to investigate maybe in an international collaboration. And that we can offer support. We will, give support as much as we can and try to mediate. But when they want us to really investigate in this collaboration who did something wrong, then we really quickly reach our limits and our remit. But I think that is really an international problem, because in every country every country can just sanction the people who work, or the employees within their research institution, and that can be a problem for international collaborations, because you really have to find the culprit. But if it's a whole research team, what do you do then? And sometimes that is still not often enough discussed in collaborations, that from the get-go they should talk about proceedings, what to do if something goes wrong. Because then we ask, so where's your do you have a proceeding? And OECD was, recommending this in 2008, and it's still not done. So I think that is because the whole topic is still stigmatized, and researchers don't really feel like this is helpful for them. But it feels like, oh, if I have to talk about agreements on scientific misconduct in the beginning, that sounds, in a way, almost aggressive. What if something happens and you don't want to address a topic like this? In a collaboration, everything is positive, but we constantly try to destigmatize agreements and how helpful this is and so on. So yeah, this is just many answers combined now.
I'm struck by how much of what you've just said is really about people, that, it's about, fairness, is like maybe awkwardness about communication with collaborators, sticking to an optimistic frame of view and not wanting to bring up something like misconduct. These are all, extremely human behaviors. And I think maybe that's part of why it's, as you said, it's been the same issues for the same 25 years, because there's something kind of inherently human about wanting to believe the best and not wanting to believe that something could go wrong. And then the challenge for your committee, obviously, is preparing people for the reality of things go wrong deliberately or not.
Yeah, and a lot of it is, prevention work, which we can't do anymore, because people come to us when it's usually too late, at the very second when the publication is supposed to be submitted, and somebody's blocking it because they are not happy with their authorship position or something. Yeah, that's a lot of work that we have to do, and where we see what could have been done better in the beginning. So there's a lot about education and training, which always sounds like, now I have to take one more class, it's too much, I can't do this. But it's so helpful to be aware of your own responsibilities also when it comes to a conflict. Your own responsibilities as an author, if you, for example, leave a project and you still want to stay on this publication and so on, you have responsibilities as well. And people are not really, and I can't blame them, because I didn't receive a class, so so it's a whole process, and so far there's too much learning by doing, I think, and there could be more prevention. And I think also on the topics that Eleni also mentioned, I think a lot of it is ethical training on how to behave ethically and maintain, your own integrity, while you have to take so many quick decisions every day, especially as a researcher with so limited resources, so little time. And the temptation is so high to skip certain things, to, they will know, just take expectations for granted. And that's for sure human issues also.
Yeah, it's fascinating that kind of the more people are involved, obviously the more complicated it gets. And I think we'll talk a little bit about, uncertainty generally later. But it's pretty clear that there needs to be more right at the start on everybody's side. And I think that's where a lot of work is falling at the feet of librarians, which moves nicely to Joel. I don't know if you're seeing some of the the same challenges that we've been talking about already? Do you see differences locally and globally? And are there kind of distinct pressures on libraries in the US that inform how you see research integrity or how you approach it?
Absolutely. And it's a very challenging topic. And I think what I try to view it from is thinking about from an individual researcher perspective, and then from an overall ecosystem perspective. And I think one of the things that is very important for us to really understand is what are some of the catalysts that are driving the challenges we're facing around research integrity. And these things are always present. These things have always been present. And one of them is motive. You're looking at the individual level, and there's pressure in some form, whether it be publish or perish, or whether it be the competitive nature of of the funding environment. Or, people have personal issues that they deal with. Maybe there are financial challenges, or maybe there's job stressors or health related stressors, which motivate them to do things that they shouldn't do. The other thing is thinking about it. The next component is thinking about it from an opportunity standpoint. And overall, there are always weaknesses in control systems that make it easy to commit fraud or commit research misconduct. Um, and some forms of those are related to the absences of policies or poor checks and balances in the systems. And then the third key thing comes down to the individual. And there's just and where there's a lack of integrity in that individual. It's a people issue. It's a character issue where they rationalize certain behaviors. So you take that and then you think about the overall system of excuse me, of prevention and detection. And unfortunately, those methodologies have lagged. Okay, the system has been too trusting. I think overall we've lacked a healthy skepticism in terms of investigating those things when they're too good to be true. And kind of having the financial background, I kind of have that natural skepticism, and so during a lot of like the financial crisis and large corporate frauds, like Enron and WorldCom, those are U.S. examples, but those things kind of rock the integrity of the financial system. And these are the very things that we're dealing with right now. I mean, nothing new, but because we've been so trusting historically, now we're having to deal with some of the things that we're dealing with. From a library perspective, and just kind of how we, some of the global pressures that we face from a library perspective. I think one is just kind of staying abreast of a lot of the major changes impacting the research ecosystem in the U.S. A big thing right now is the political system, which is driving significant changes in the research funding landscape. And so universities are having to quickly formulate responses and to deal with those challenges. From a library perspective, one of the things we deal with is from a content licensing standpoint. And when we sign an agreement with the publisher to provide journal content to our research communities, indirectly we are vouching for the integrity of their content, whether we think so or not. And as a result of that increases our institutional risk, and we have to do more due diligence on our part to reduce that perceived risk. For example, if we realize that a publisher has a widespread issue with quality control, I think now we're going to have to think twice about entering into that agreement. And and yet we don't really have consistent or specific licenses, licensing language that would protect us from this type of issue. From a local standpoint, the pressures on us is how do we keep our authors clean, for lack of a better word, and reduce the risk that they are polluting the system, or that they fall victim to pollution themselves. And so a big part of it, again, is just keeping our eyes on things that appear too good to be true.
You struck on one of my new favorite topics based on a talk I saw actually at the World Conference on Research and Integrity in Athens about drawing parallels between research misconduct and actually financial misconduct, exactly through a criminological perspective. Do you think that your background has informed how you are setting up policies or are educating researchers in your current role?
Yeah, I mean, that definitely has an impact. I think part of it is understanding, having a good understanding of what are some of the motivations and why people do what they do, right? That's really at a fundamental level. And then the other piece of it is, again, is just from an institutional perspective, is looking at the entire ecosystem and just really thinking about, what are things that can potentially go wrong, okay? And then how do we design things to help prevent as much as we can, and then if we can't prevent it, then how do we detect it on the back end? And I think that's really a huge challenge, because that type of thing also drives a tremendous amount of cost. And it's not just from a monetary standpoint, but just from things that institutions, publishers have to do differently in order to deal with the situations. But ultimately, the bottom line is that it does drive up costs throughout the system when we have to deal with these things. But we have to weigh the cost and the benefit of implementing certain types of controls, because there's going to be a certain amount that we're going to have to accept. Okay. Take for instance a retailer, a giant retailer that sells merchandise. There's a certain amount of shrinkage that they have to accept, from whether it be from employees or from customers. Those things are going to happen. You're going to have a certain amount of shrinkage, and as you think about the controls that you put in place to deal with it, the cost can't outweigh the benefits of doing that. And so that's where we are today.
I think that's a really good point about bringing us to that sort of research realities that I wanted to talk about today, because we talk about policies, we talk about best practice, but you're dealing with this every day. And one of the big sort of emerging topics that I have no doubt that you're getting lots of questions on, and is a big topic for us as well, is generative AI and sort of the uncertainty and use and misuse of it. It's rapidly evolving, and I think Eleni mentioned already that in emerging technologies, the challenge of seeing where the technology is going and putting things in place to be able to deal with that. From your perspectives, with best practice in use and misuse of AI being in flux, how do you manage that uncertainty? Like, what measures do you recommend to ensure it serves the use of generative AI or AI in general, serves progress without compromising principles? And I'll come back to Eleni first. As a researcher yourself, how do you have discussions with colleagues, your team or your students, when about using AI tools for literature reviews or data analyses or whatever are involved, especially around kind of transparency and reproducibility of those tools?
Well, this is a very hot topic in our discussions and in everyday practice. Actually, we were discussing just yesterday that now these days is this time of the year where you submit applications for EU funding. It's for different framework schemes for funding. And one of the topic was that there is no, let's say, clear process of how you can declare that you have used these tools. So this is a missing thing from different, let's say, processes that is not yet addressed properly. So, but at the same time, you know that people are using it, so and they are very competitive in that term. So you either do it yourself as well, or you are left behind somehow, at least in terms of time and efficiency, because you have to compare yourself with others who are using it. So okay, it's quite difficult to write a philosophical paper using AI. However, I have to admit that I checked out of curiosity, and it's getting better and better. So they are very well trained, the tools. So I think that to some extent, we will get to a point that you will not be able, within reasonable time, to see to what extent someone has used the tools or not. So it's not a matter of, it's here, people are using it, so we have to regulate things somehow. And we also need to find a way, let's say, to distinct between good practices and bad practices, good applications and bad applications. So it's a matter of training, it's a matter of creating a new ethos and a new culture, research culture, taking into consideration that this is a real thing, it's happening, it has a broad application, so we cannot ignore it. We cannot pretend that we are going to the library as we did some years ago, picking books and journals and do, let's say, review, which would take a lot of time. Things are different now, so we need to train the students first to know how to identify the good stuff, let's say, because again, you need some skills in order to be able to pick up the right, let's say, answer given by the tool. And to be able to cross-check and to have an opinion on your own on whether things are going to the right direction or not. So we cannot skip the, let's say, the more traditional ways of learning, because then it won't be knowledge, it will be something else. It will be use of information. So it's one thing, information, and another knowledge. One thing is institutions to have in place certain procedures and regulations, and in order to people to be able to declare that they are using these tools, and to decide, let's say, collectively to what extent this is acceptable, and also younger researchers and students to find a way to balance, let's say, this feeling of, wow, now it's new, it's fast, you gain so much time, you skip so much effort. Is this good? Should I use it, and to what extent? And at the same time, to be convinced that they need to put some more effort in order to bring proper research results. Because even if you have, at least for, I mean, the applications of AI in the way that I described them in analysis and in reviews, in the lab, it's a different thing. The applications there are very specific. They are being, I mean, there are so many different applications of AI in in conjunction with other types of technologies. So I'm not sure whether it's also, if we do justice if we use the term AI as an umbrella term anymore, because the applications and the differentiations and the particularities are so many that I think that we will end up again going field by field, discipline by discipline, and try to find, let's say, a new balance. But it's a hot topic, I have to admit. Yeah.
The challenge of that heterogeneity on top of what I think, Joel, I'm going to ask you, because on top of that personal motivation aspect for the individual of wanting to, not spend, if their kind of person who's competing for the funding application is only spending half the length of time preparing the bid, how do you advise? So, Joel, how are libraries playing a role in educating faculty and students about best practice for use of AI, including citation for usage, as Eleni just mentioned, or data privacy or algorithmic bias? And do you see consistency, inconsistency, and guidance between institutions as practice evolves?
I think the short answer to us playing a role in educating around AI, yes, we are. And do we see inconsistencies? Yes, we are. Yes, we do. But there's a couple of things for us to think about. Institutions as a whole are at different points of their AI journey. There's a continuum from those who are just beginning, from those who are who have been leaders in it. Okay. And that continuum is driven by some resource constraints, whether it be financial or other competing priorities or whatever it is. But that's what drives the inconsistency. And libraries as a whole are concerned about the educational aspects, and some libraries have taken more programmatic approaches to it, while others are still experimenting. But I think one of the things we have to think about is, from my perspective and the way I see it, AI is just another technology. Okay. And yes, it has a lot of other things that come with it. So I'm not trying to minimize that. But if we think about a lot of the library services that have emerged, over the years and stuff, they've all been about saving our users time and money. Okay. And AI is really no different from that aspect. Okay. Whether it be things such as interlibrary loan, which provide users access to content that we don't subscribe to, or or pay per article, which provides instant access to unsubscribed content. Those things have all been about saving our users time and money. That's always been part of our core mission. So the education process for AI is kind of similar, but again, I mean, we have some of these other things because there are a lot more tentacles around AI, and things happen, things emerge. They seem to be it seemed to be very quick, but not really, because the applications of AI, some of them are relatively, they're older, right? And things that maybe we didn't think of them as being AI was actually the case and stuff. So but what it does is that it changes our pedagogical approaches, and we really have to think about it and be ahead of it. And I think that's really the challenge that we all face.
Yeah, you're sort of racing to catch up with the both the technology, but then the use and misuse of it, which kind of brings me on to Jordas. Is this, are you seeing cases of misconduct related to AI, or do you foresee them rising soon? Is this, you know, what guidelines and things are being put in place in order to adapt?
Yeah, so far we have very few inquiries on AI, but I'm sure this is just the beginning. So I'm sure they will come up on the horizon, and we also thought about this, what can be expected, and it probably what's going to be interesting is, or what's put more into the focus again, is the documentation process of your research. It has always been demanded to document everything you do, the methods you use, the tools you used, and that's why also the code of conduct on research integrity in Germany is produced here, or published here by our largest funding organization. And they were also considering, do they have to change the code of conduct? But in there it already says you should transparently write about all the tools that you use. So they didn't even have to do that. But of course, there are lots and lots of new policies, guidelines on all kinds of AI. So, and still gaps also to be closed for sure. But what I found very interesting, or where I was, listening closely, was when there was this report, for example, also in Nature, by a researcher who said that she was suddenly accused by a reviewer that she clearly had used AI to write her article, and she said, "What? I haven't even done that." And she was just lucky that she had used GitHub to, for documentation purposes, and she could show all her drafts and clearly show that she hadn't used it. So that I find interesting, because from our perspective, we always need proof for the allegations. So how do we deal with, suspicion? Or there was another article. So we still have our resources from, public articles, because we have few inquiries. So there was another one from someone who was teaching writing, and she said that suddenly these suspicious words came up in so many texts that she was reading, and she said it doesn't even sound good. But like what you said also, Eleni, first people have to train and get their own knowledge and skill set to be able, like students, to differentiate what's good, what's not, and so on. And for them it was like, but it sounds so sophisticated. And she said, no, it doesn't. So that is interesting, and raises so many questions. And we will see what's going to happen. But I think documentation is a real issue. And we had one case where people really they were even openly saying we used AI, and could send us proof of the prompts and so on. It was already helpful that they had documented their stuff. So that is going to be more in the focus, I'm sure.
Yeah, I think that kind of touches, all of that documentation topic touches on what we hear about some of the biggest challenges about building accountability, is like what we say is the right thing to do is not always reflected in the day-to-day reality of the researcher. And I think, as Joel was saying, the limited time or resources, or a lack of incentives or misincentives, are some of the commonly cited reasons for slow adoption of some of the responsible research practices, like fully fair data sharing or pre-registering studies and analysis plans. But I wonder, when we were preparing this, of like how much of what we think about on a publisher side is part of the daily conversation for research teams. So why do you think that there's sometimes that divergence between topics that publishers or funders or institutions highlight as being really important, and what researchers end up, prioritizing themselves? And who do you think is, and who in reality is, if different, responsible for establishing best practices when it comes to research and its communication? And if you don't mind, Jordas, I'm going to kind of start with you, because I think it touches on something right at the start, that in 2025, we can send gigabytes of data to the other side of the planet instantaneously, and yet, as you said at the start, you're still seeing the same questions as it's been for the last 25 years on authorship or plagiarism. Why do you think this remains such a challenge still, and do you ever see it changing?
I mean, the authorship conflicts are probably just still a problem because we still have authorship as the main currency in research, as you can say, to show what you have done and that you are responsible for this work. And I don't think people want this to change, because obviously you want to know who has written this and who has had this great idea and performed the research, and who is accountable and who can I go to with questions, and so on and so on. So the function of authorship is clear, and as long as this is also your main way to get the credit for the work, this won't change, and there will be fights over the credit, and I think that's fine. Like I already said, education on responsibilities would help in this regard, but obviously there's other factors. There's so much structural stuff ongoing, and I don't want to blame the individual for that. For sure not. We also have the honorary authorship, clearly still a structural thing, and so on. So will this change? What I hope will change is also the view from the other side, from the persons, or not the persons, but the evaluation perspective. Like, should authorship be the only thing that people are evaluated for? There's so many other initiatives, open data, and research evaluation is a great topic. So I think things will change in this regard, hopefully, to take some pressure off of the authorship. But it's complicated. There was something else I was going to say. I forgot. But maybe I will think about it again.
Interrupt me if you think of it. But yeah, I think that is authorship is a really good point of something that maybe funders have stopped talking about as we needing to put at the start, or maybe institutions don't have necessarily training all the time on it, but it's something that is very real for researchers every day. John, I'm going to come to you, because another example of something that I see as there being a big discrepancy on focus in what publishers focus on, or publishers talk about a lot, and is paper mills. This is something that Eleni at the World Conference of Research Integrity last year, or that you would have heard. We know this talk was talked about in almost every session, along with generative AI. And Joel, you've written about this, but why do you think that there's still that discrepancy between what publishers focus on and maybe what the researchers have awareness of?
Well, I think the biggest thing is that there are just simply different motivations and different goals. If we think about it from the publisher standpoint, they're motivated by driving submissions. I mean, for example, researchers have different motivations, and institutions have different motivations as well, and those things are kind of colliding. And so when we think about who's responsible for establishing best practices, I would say we all are. and we all have to come to the table and kind of reconcile those different motivations. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges. And you touched on publishing a recent article in Insights with my co-author Curtis Brundy on paper mills, and going back to why, you ask the questions, why do paper mills exist? And it kind of goes back to some of the things that I talked about. One is motivation, two is opportunity, three is the lack of integrity of the individuals. But then the fourth thing that we have to think about is collusion, right? And what I mean by that is that there are multiple people acting on several levels to compromise the system, and that's something that is very difficult to deal with. Because it's one thing if it's just one individual, but if we're talking about multiple individuals that have various responsibilities that can come together and say, hey, this is how we can do this unethical thing that that we're doing, and we'll either get published, get a lot of publications out of, or we'll make money. And I think that's the challenge that we're faced with. And I think historically it looks like misconduct is on the rise, or research integrity issues or retractions, or however you want to term it, are on the rise. And maybe they are, maybe they aren't. I mean, it would look that way, but I think the thing we have to look at is that we've had weaknesses that have been inherent in the system. That opportunity has always been there, and now we're starting to detect some of those things. Okay, and we're starting to create tools to detect more of those things, and we're starting to use, technology and AI to detect more of those things. And I anticipate we'll continue to see a rise in those things, and then over time they may plateau, because we have a better understanding of some of the weaknesses that we have. Um, the other piece with that is again, it goes back to we'll never be able to eliminate it altogether, because the system comprises of people, and people are not perfect.
I think that's a point that needs to be well observed, that people aren't perfect. It isn't a perfect system, but I think topics like paper mills, that I wrote down the words compromise the system, because I think it's so true that yes, the motivations are different, but compromising the system means kind of polluting the literature. And so that's why I think of it as a topic that's so important for researchers to be aware of, but they aren't necessarily as up to date on the latest in paper mills. And so, Eleni, I'm interested in this difference between what kind of people making policy are talking about, and then the people doing the research are living. With your kind of philosophy background, I'm interested in that kind of epistemological or ethical elements that you might see in the discrepancy between who knows what and kind of that knowledge generation. And do you think researchers are researchers missing the big picture, or are experts and policymakers just ignorant of the research reality?
Well, I think that, the one thing is that for these two, let's say, different polars, they are in their world is their own universe. So they have different interests and different investments that need to take care of, and sometimes these are contradicting, or they they are in a way in an antithesis somehow. It's my life, your death kind of thing. At the same time, it takes two to tango, so you cannot have the one without the other. Researchers are not isolated, are part of certain systems, and systems cannot function and produce without the individuals. So, it's getting quite like a motto, very, naive to say that we need this top-down and bottom-up approach at the same time. But it is necessary. And the thing about policymakers and research managers and top level, let's say, institutional people, is that it's quite often that they are not very willing to take into consideration research results. And by this, I'm saying that imagine politicians or policy making, and to what extent they are open to what scientists suggest. I mean, we have a very recent global situation that made that very clear, and I'm talking about the COVID pandemic. So it was this constant, let's say, effort from both sides on who is going to be the winner of this let's say debate, because what is at stake in any given moment, it's quite different for all these different stakeholders. So it's one thing to talk about research results about the vaccines, and another thing to discuss about public health at the same time, and also take decisions. So although most of the times I'm really, let's say, not opposite, but I'm very skeptic about the way policymakers take decisions. I have to admit that there are circumstances that you need to take immediate action and produce results without having, let's say, the luxury of contemplating and comparing and find the best solution available. You don't always have the time. So it's not that I'm not sure that it's an epistemological difference.
Mm-hmm.
It's a difference in terms of interests and in terms of the position that you have in this continuum.
Mm-hmm.
But then again, when we see how things change in terms of policies, it's quite often that we have to give the time, let's say, to see new research results to be developed and communicated, and then policymakers are in a way pushed in a position to take action, to change policies, and then again, new policies give the floor to further developments of research and science. So it's not a linear thing. I said it's a continuum, but it's a circular thing.
Mm-hmm.
And this is how, for instance, innovation works. You produce knowledge, you produce research results, and then policy comes to, in a way, put things to some order, and then new needs come up and new results, and then again new policies. Or again, you have certain problems and policy making needs to provide solutions, so they ask for scientific solutions to a certain direction. So, well, we usually say that, at least to the students and young researchers, at least within the academia, because when we go out to society and to policy making, things are getting more complicated, that the most important thing is to create a kind of culture, a kind of ethos. And this is something that reflects and applies to all individuals, procedures, institutions. So it cannot just be imposed and either you take it or leave it. You have to train yourself, you have to train the teams, you have to train the scientific environment and the research environment to a certain direction in order to adapt, to respond to these kind of challenges. But I am optimistic, I must say.
I really liked,
I have to say.
I really liked what you said at the start about I think you said it cynically. I think that the danger of people's world being their own universe and not being able to see how you, as a policymaker, influence and interact with the rest of the system. And you use the word continuum, which I thought was a nice one, even like a circular continuum. And I think one of the reoccurring themes that's come up today is the need for conversation, between both at the individual level and at a systems level. I think, as Joel had pointed out, to minimize the risk for authorship disputes, questionable research practices, or larger scale fraud. And I think that communication across that continuum, as Eleni said, is one of the main takeaways from today. So I wanted to ask Joel, briefly, if you can say from your vantage point, from the library's vantage point, how do you see libraries fostering and facilitating that transparent communication, being a conduit for best practice and oversight, and open communication regarding potential misconduct investigations? Briefly, if you can.
Absolutely, I can do it briefly. So, and thanks for the question. I think first and foremost, one of the things is kind of clarifying the roles and responsibilities. When a case arises, it's not always clear in terms of who does what. And I think that's been a challenge as these things have arisen. Okay, the different research integrity cases. And I think libraries have to be more engaged in more global discussions around research integrity. I think that's important. The other thing is partnering with some of the national organizations. Well, first starting with publishers. There needs to be tighter partnerships there between connecting the research integrity officers of the institution to the research integrity officers of the publishers as well. Organizations such as NISO, Crossref, Retraction Watch, and providing assistance in improving the end-to-end retraction process. The other thing is supporting and advocating for alternative open access models, less reliant on incentive-driven models like APCs. And I'll stop there.
I know we could go on forever. Eleni, we mentioned that you were on the organizing committee of the World Conference on Research Integrity, which by its nature brings together a lot of the players in the research kind of ecosystem. What was your takeaway from that effort on collaboration within research integrity? If you can give kind of a brief comment.
Well, yes, let's say the global perspective that the World Conferences on Research Integrity bring is that, again, we realize that we are in our own bubble, whether it's the institution, the country, or the continent, and then you realize that a lot of people actually work and do research on research integrity, which is a very good thing, and that there are many new initiatives that are trying to address and respond to the challenges that we are talking about. So the research integrity system, if I may say, is very aware of these challenges, and sometimes they are chasing things, and some others they are trying to be ahead to some extent, which is also a good thing. And I also like the idea that these issues can be put into social context. So other topics that have to do with equity, with accessibility, with the way that we use language in order to address scientific issues, have a social perspective and reflect social problems or discrepancies or, let's say, unresolved issues. So I really enjoyed that perspective of the conference. And there is one thing that I just want to follow up on what Joel mentioned at some point about the cost of research integrity and all of these, let's say, policies, that we have this motto within the bubble that research integrity costs, transparency costs, reproducibility costs a lot, but imagine how much the lack of them costs. And I'm talking about real money. So there are a lot of interesting research results depicting this thing. So that if you think that research integrity is expensive, it's much more expensive research misconduct. So cost is not always an issue if you see it broadly, or if you can foresee proper measures in the long run on how to resolve this kind of issues.
Yeah. And finally, Jordas, I think we've touched on the power of communication, and the importance, as Lenny's just said, of being transparent and doing things well. But one player there in the kind of open communication that's often not discussed is whistleblowers, and they play a really crucial role in research misconduct investigations. I was wondering if you can comment briefly on what progress do you see being made in supporting whistleblowers? Do you see libraries as being a potential player in that system to provide research integrity guidance for whistleblowers and their actions, and how could their role be strengthened to improve communication outcomes?
Yeah, the connection to libraries is very interesting. I think for whistleblowing, it's a bit difficult. Libraries, of course, have a huge impact in, information literacy and offering classes and so on. So that is definitely a thing, and they should be informed on what they can advise to researchers who do see something that is wrong and who should they go to and so on. But otherwise, the responsibility really lies in the hands of the institution and in the structures. I think also we didn't really talk about the responsibility of publishers today, which of course also is the whole topic on its own. But from our perspective, is the institutions who could do much more. We also have, a power abuse as a topic in Germany currently very strongly ongoing. A lot of things are happening bottom up. Researchers are upset, and victims of this are very upset and are claiming changes, and there are a lot of movements in this regard, and sometimes institutions are just very slow to adapt changes, and so we keep analyzing what is it, what are also barriers, because you were also asking why do different kind of institutions and publishers and so on set different focuses. Well, that's of course also because we have different barriers that we see from our perspective, and the institutions do too, I'm sure. But it's what we still observe is that what protects whistleblowers in a field where all you have is your reputation. You always have to fight for the next short-term contract and so on. So you need your reputation, and as long as there are people in the bigger positions threatening you will never set foot on this ground again, and these things really happen, this has to be clearly sanctioned if there's something like this comes up. And also, of course, the actual misconduct has to be sanctioned. We have to have I think that is a real that is one of the most important helps. Take people seriously who make a claim, investigate, and strongly sanction, and do not shy away from people because they bring up the big money, But what also, I still somehow have an optimistic feeling because we have so many movements and new network creations. I also, bubble the word Eleni also was in my mind for the whole research integrity community. There are so many people working with this and dealing with it, and it's so important that those people also connect, because it's tough to constantly face misconduct, and deal with it and be hopeful in vision of all these structures that are so. But also the ombudspersons now, they understand it's a problem and they have to really deliver, and they are really responsible and also deciding on people's fate. If they say there's no misconduct, or yes, that is a huge decision, and they want to have the knowledge, and they want to interact, and they want to discuss abstractly about cases and so on. And I think that's great. That's a great development. So many movements, many people are connecting with each other, and that makes me hopeful.
I think that's a really positive note, actually, to end can be quite a negative topic, or like a serious topic. Francesca?
We do have a few questions that are really interesting, and I'm going to say we're probably going to ask our speakers to maybe reply to us in writing, so we can put together like a more exhaustive blog about these questions. So the first one is for Joel, and how long are scientific libraries going to survive with the advent of generative AI? So if we could keep the answer very short, and then we can expand on that going forward, that would be good.
I think we'll be around for at least another 222 years. That's kind of how I see the future there. Interesting question. I think libraries have always been resilient. They've always adapted to change. They're here today, and they will be here tomorrow.
Oh, that's a nice answer. Thank you. And if we have librarians still still here, feel free to react by, using the little emojis if you agree with Joel's answer. Then the second question is quite long and is also kind of a statement. So I try to kind of summarize it. Basically, this person said, many current debates about AI in academia seems to focus on symptoms like AI assisted plagiarism without addressing the deeper issues driving them. For example, over-competitive research environments and flawed incentives for productivity, educational systems that unintentionally encourage cheating rather than genuine learning, and so forth. So the question would be, how can academic institutions and libraries address the root causes, such as competitive pressures, flow incentive structures, inadequate teaching methods, that give rise to AI-related problems like plagiarism and biased algorithms, rather than only treating the immediate symptoms? It's a very complex question that I'm sure we can also answer, in a better way in writing. But if you have any thoughts about this?
I just would like to say that I also think of course, it's a matter of training, and to teach about the impacts of your behavior. For example, what's always beyond me, and that's not necessarily AI, but manipulation. And to be honest, I find manipulation even way worse than the authorship compromise. All bad, but manipulation in the field of clinical research. I'm sorry, like, how do people not understand that they themselves could be affected, or their family, if they, you fake and completely manipulated, but even worse, like completely fake entire articles in the field of health. This is about medication that you get, like, it's causing pain, it's causing death. Like, this is, but it's how detached are people between the work that they are doing and the effects that this have. I feel like there's some training that could be done in this regard.
And I think the point that he was trying to make was that, why are they, like, maybe they know already about this, and why are they still forced to do it? Because they need to do it for their career, things like that. So how do we change, the root problem, which is, why do they need to write 500 papers a year or something? Obviously, it's an exaggeration, but why do we need to tell them to do that as a, system?
Yeah, I think part of it is that, again, it goes back to those pressures, and there's individual pressures that people encounter, but then there's also the institutional pressures, which and even competitive funding pressures, um, and if you're going to eliminate those, which are very difficult, I mean, because when you talk about competing for funding, how do you make that funding equitable? How do you make it where people don't have to compete for it? I mean, I think that's the real challenge around that. And those kinds of things are what drive behaviors, um, that create things that are unintended. Okay. And until we can eliminate those, those are much larger issues that we have fundamentally and stuff.
If I may add, it's just, I think that, for instance, AI and all these new challenges that we face works like a magnifying glass. So we see things that are already there. They are quite old as well. So some of them are important social problems. So the way that education works and academia works, it's an old thing. You can find cases of research misconduct and of bad behavior towards young researchers and young professionals 200 years ago, 100 years ago. So it's an old thing. It has to do with human nature and the different interests that interact and need to be in a way managed. So the new challenges address in a different way, in a more emphatic way, things that are already there. The reason that we are not going to the roots, I guess, has to do with the difficulties and the complexities that these problems entail. But let's say, if I may say, that the positive thing is that when with the opportunity of AI, of emerging technologies, things are being put into discussion in a more emphatic way. And you see people that had never thought about these issues before, now they start becoming more vigilant, more self-reflecting. So sometimes something really bad needs to happen in order to go back to the roots and see the actual problem.
That's great. So,
Can I add a more thing? Like, I just want to say that there are a lot of like platforms and levels where all these things are clearly discussed and debated, like the incentive structures, the structures that enhance all of this, you know, the complexity level, etc. Like you mentioned the World Conferences also on research integrity several times, but I'm sure many people have never heard of this unless they are somehow involved in the research integrity field. And for example, there are so many best practices already out there, and it's kind of like, who has the responsibility to disseminate this knowledge? Because there was, you know, in 2019 there was the Hong Kong principles on researcher assessment and so on, which is so good, and which institution has heard of this? You know, probably not so many. And so there's we have to think about also, how do we connect people and bring this knowledge to the right places, and the persons who have to take responsibility and have the power to make changes. Because, you know, we can talk about it all we want, but if the leadership isn't in it, difficult.
absolutely. Thank you. And yeah, there was a question, I posed a question in the chat actually to see if any researchers feel like they are connected or involved enough in the conversation. And I did receive a couple of answers, and, you know, it seems they are not really involved, or that, you know, in any case there isn't much debate anyway until there isn't a reconstruction of the competition model or the assessment model, which is exactly what you were saying. Like, without leadership, without knowing exactly what needs to be changed, and some changes are applied, then there's nothing much that can be done. So we need a better connection between all the parts to be sure that something can happen. It would be interesting to see if something happens out of this. Maybe somebody following us will start at institutional level, and that will spread, and you know, little by little, maybe more conferences in the future, that more cross kind of field conferences. So not just a librarian level or researchers level, but something that brings everything together. It would be really great. But if you have any ideas, just write to us, let us know. And Jordi, sorry, you want to say something?
Yeah, just one thing, because I mean, it's very difficult also to connect all the researchers who are all in the, you know, different groups, associations, and so on. Of course, associations, let's not forget about research associations, but there are some, you know, digital platforms where people can get connected. And, you know, Papier, I think we never mentioned this entire conversation was so important, that people can just directly comment, and, you know, and this helps us also to understand maybe structural difficulties. Or Retraction Watch, so important to use it as a platform, the Retraction Watch database, and so on. And these are some grassroots initiatives that are also so important, as long as to also give researchers a voice.
Okay, so maybe we can put together some links or some resources for the people that have joined us today, that we can share with all of you, and maybe we can start little by little to spread this information. There's so much information out there, and so many things that people should, people should know, researchers should know. But at the same time, as one of you said earlier, it's just so much noise, so much. It feels like another training that they don't have time to do. Okay, I think I'll leave this at that. I'll leave it to Gronja to say some final words, and yeah, and then we'll end the conversation.
I had such a good time. Thank you so much. I could have talked about any of these topics for hours and hours and hours. And thank you so much for sharing your expertise and your time. I really liked that. Ultimately, this is research integrity is a people issue, both in terms of the problem and the solution. And so I think that walking away with some optimism about the future and about having connections is a really good takeaway from a topic like this. So thank you all so much for today.
Yes.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all, and see you all next time with Karger in Conversation. And have a look at your email. We will be sending you some more information about the next events and also about this one with more resources for you to share as well. Thank you all, and see you next time. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Goodbye. Thank you.